So you built a 35-person company to learn how to build your next company.
Yep.
I mean,
overnight success. You go from selling your $500,000 thing to creating like a $50 online course.
Sure.
That's like saying, can I borrow your pen? Can I marry your wife?
Right.
It's like in the end, it's solving the same problem, which is
Jay Melone is the founder of Profit Ladder. He helps B2B consultants create revenue engines with Wedge Offers that attract dream clients, increase monthly revenue, and make you the go-to expert.
when I look at that landing page, I have this uneasy feeling that I should be charging $1,000 or that's the feeling that I want my clients to feel. And if you go to the page and you don't get that warm and fuzzy feeling, then I never even see them to begin with. People that go through it, they show up.
If you can go back in time and talk to young Jay, what advice would you give him?
Talked myself out of staying in corporate longer.
Wow, this conversation with Jay was amazing. There's a moment in this episode where Jay reveals the one strategy that completely flipped his business. It's the same approach that let him sell $30,000 worth of offers effortlessly and shorten his sales cycle from months to weeks. And when he explained it, let's just say light bulb went off. Jay's breakthrough might be the answer you're waiting for. Welcome, Jay.
Welcome, Jay.
Hey guys, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Jay, obviously I touched on your 35-person consultancy, but can you just give us a little more around your background? How did that 35-person company come about, and what brings you to where you are in life and career?
Yeah. The company that you're talking about is, it's called New Haircut. It still exists. It's just sort of in the background these days. And we sold product strategy to large companies, Home Depot, Ford, Amazon, Google. And we were spread across 3 countries. I had a business partner for a long time. He was Romanian, moved his family to Berlin, and we predominantly sold to a US market. So even though I was much more comfortable putting headphones on and writing code in my cube, like I used to do in my corporate days, I was tagged as the guy to sell. And nobody told me that when I signed up for the job of launching my own company, that you're going to have to spend at least half of your time marketing and selling. And so I spent years trying to figure out what does it mean to market? How do you sell? I used all these sort of like playbooks that I found out in the world and the personality of them and like how those systems work. It just didn't fit the type of business owner I was, the type of person that would show up to a sales meeting with my clients. And so like, as we get into the story today, what you'll hear is that I spent the next 5 years or so trying to figure out a way to sell in a way that suited me. And so like me and a lot of the people that I work with today love the slogan of I hate selling. And that was kind of how I felt for 15 years.
Jay, I'm curious though. You mentioned in your corporate days of coding. So are you an kind of engineer by trade that just has been forced to become a salesperson?
Yeah, I went to college for bio. I was going to be a doctor, realized I didn't like blood. That's probably a red flag. And then I went and took a programming course. After my parents had spent a boatload on undergrad, I went and took a post-grad course on writing code, and I got hired. The short version of the story is I got hired, recruited out of there and hired by Accenture. And then I spent the next 7 years writing code and realized that I loved the art and the creativity of solving problems through code. So yeah, I was a pig in shit, like sitting with my headphones on, writing code, even if it was I built AT&T's first VoIP platform, like way back in the day. Wow. They stuck me and 8 other engineers in a room and we wrote code for 3 months and we were allowed to come out to go to the bathroom and when it was done. Other than that, I like that. And that's kind of like what I thought work was like. And I thought when I built a business that I just get to like do what I do. And people would be like, look what he does. He's a magician. We're just going to pay this guy all sorts of money to do what he does. And that's not actually how it works.
If you like what you're seeing and you want to see more, be sure to click on the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click on the bell. It lets YouTube know you want to support the This Is the Way podcast, and it helps spread the word, and we greatly appreciate it. And now, back to the episode.
So then I'm curious here then, as you transition from corporate life to what you had mentioned about building out this, 35 person business, you also mentioned that that's still happening, but that doesn't sound like it's the majority of your time today. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I go even further into that. So what I refer to now, New Haircut, my consulting company, is basically my case study for my new business. So my new business is called Profit Ladder, and it's the genesis of me figuring out how to sell with what I refer to as flywheels and wedge offers.
Yeah.
And now that I have that system in place, I've built Profit Ladder to work with consultants and coaches to help bring those systems to their business so that they can grow in ways that feel more aligned with the type of founder and creative that they are.
Interesting. So you built a 35 person company to learn how to build your next company.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
overnight success.
Yeah. Interesting. And how long was New Haircut? Like, what was the duration of that as you built it out to a 35 person team?
It took us about 6 or 7 years to get to that number. And then we actually started to shrink a little bit because as we went from implementation, building technology to more strategy and discovery, we needed less people. And we are actually making more money, but the sales cycles got way longer because when you're selling a website, most people know what a website is. They kind of know what they're buying. When you're buying strategy and new product development and innovation and research and all these things that we did as we evolved into the new version of New Haircut, that became harder to sell, longer to sell, more people in higher positions that are harder to reach, that you get their approval and then you need 10 other people's approvals. And I was like, what the hell did I get myself into? I went from selling $5,000 websites to selling $200,000 innovation programs, taking 2 weeks to sell versus now it's taking me 12 months to sell something. So I just made my life 10x worse than it was. So I spent most of the second half of my career at New Haircut fixing my own problem of making sales easier.
Interesting. So can you dive in more to what the heck did that look like? How did you go about that?
Yeah. So our signature offer at New Haircut was this thing called a Business Opportunity Accelerator. And it was a 6-month program. We sold it for anywhere between 100 to 300,000. And when you're selling to a Ford, they're not worried about spending $100,000. They're worried about, does it work? Why should we hire you? Versus I was going up against McKinsey, Deloitte, Boston Consulting Group. Why should we hire a New Haircut? Cute name. Why should we hire you guys?
Yeah.
Is it going to work? Then if we got past that, it was, how long is this going to take? How much time do you need? Who do you need for my team? What if it doesn't work? So all these things are kicking the tires. They're like objection. And the only thing I had in my back pocket to answer those was predominantly my pitch deck and case studies. And they work pretty well. Referrals, great. The problem is there's dissonance between I did this thing for this other group of people and it worked pretty well. And now I'm going to do it for you, but you're you, they're them. They work in this industry, you work in that industry. And even when we narrowed in on like 3 verticals, there was still friction for them to know that it was going to actually work. So that's the thing that I was trying to fix. And because there were multiple people making that decision, even when one person came to the conclusion that we were the right team, then it went to the next round of conversations. And that just kind of made my life a living hell. And then that's when it went well. And then many throughout would ghost me, would just, we decided not to do it. Okay, no problem. That was 3 months of my life.
Yeah. We were, by the way, on that corporate side with, Disney or Netflix. So we're sorry for what everybody did. It's like, we know what it's like,
you guys.
But we know because it, at the same time, it's like, half the time, when you have somebody here who's making that decision, it goes through so many people, and all it could take is somebody being like, oh, well, we're decided to prioritize this effort, or we're buying this company, so nothing's happening for the next, 2 years. It's like, it's unfortunate. So I could completely see where you're at. Each time it's like, come on, is this one going to actually make it to the end?
It was as basic as sourcing, coming in and saying, what's this company that you want to hire? The revenue per year? Only 5 million? Nope. Unless they do 25 million, we don't want to work with them. I'm like,
And then sometimes that would have been great information to know just out of the gate when you started, instead of that maybe getting 6 months in when they decide to tell you that. So anyway, we get it. Yeah.
We definitely sympathize and empathize.
Yes. All those things.
We always hated going back and having the conversation with folks such as yourself because we really wanted to do it. But then you're like, yeah, your hands end up getting tied. So anyway, sorry, sidetracked. Back to your story.
I mean, so I spent, once I realized that the problem that I was facing as a business owner, and like then all of my people that were sort of sitting on the bench waiting for Jay to sell so that they could do their work, so that they get paid. We started to ask ourselves this single question over the next several years. What would it look like if this were easier to sell? So the first thing that we tried was, let's take this program, this accelerator program that we have. We get a lot of interest in this one framework that we run, which was one that we learned from Google. It's called a design sprint. We got a name for ourselves for being a consultancy that you could hire to run great design sprints. And a design sprint is just basically an innovation framework that produces prototypes with validated research from your market. So it was a nice win. It took us about a week to run, and we charged like 30 grand for it. So for this tiny little business, they're thinking 30 grand. Holy, that's more than I sell today. You have to remember, we were selling like $250,000, $300,000 larger packages. So to go down to 30,000, now we had this much smaller, much tighter, more compact, much less risky thing that I could start a relationship with. And that was my first sort of like aha moment that this is a wedge offer. This is a way that I can open a relationship by lowering the stakes, lowering the cost, but lowering the stakes mostly, that I could demonstrate this is how we work. This is what we do. It costs this much, takes this long. This is what you get. Open and shut. Very easy to understand and therefore easy to buy. And that was my first sort of foray into being like, okay, there's an easier, better way that I could sell and begin relationships, because once somebody ran the sprint with us, it just naturally moved them to our accelerator.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. I can totally relate to that too, by the way, Jay, because I'm at a consulting firm now. And that's exactly what we do. It's a larger firm, not an Accenture type, but much smaller, but it's still big enough to not be considered a mom and pop shop. We don't call it a wedge offer, but it's exactly the approach to kind of try to penetrate a new organization or a new company or a new department, just to prove that we're capable before saying, okay, here's a $500,000 offer now that we've proved ourselves. So I totally relate.
Yep. Exactly.
Although I will say today, some companies, because, different names I've seen around it, sometimes some will think about it like a tripwire offer, but in that scenario, it's often like, I hate the ones where they'll be like, here's and I say this and I'll be guilty of it as well, but like the whole upsell, hey, here's this $20 thing. Well, now that you're here, here's the, $100 one, but act now, and you could get the other one here. But I get the idea. You're using, it's the buyer psychology. And I think there's a term referred to as Benjamin Franklin effect, which the concept is that when you ask for a small favor first, people are more likely to then return a larger favor. And the example that sticks with me is, the idea is if you're at this big event and you say to somebody, hey, can I use your phone? They're going to look at you and be like, who are you? But if you said, can I borrow your pen? And then escalated that to, hey, can I use your phone now? In their brain, they're like, well, I trust this person. Obviously, I've already done business with them, lent them the pin. And it's not like they're going to run off because they ain't run off with that. And this whole wedge offer, to me feels like using that similar psychological effect, but obviously at a larger scale. And that in-person time, that thing, that you mentioned there, obviously puts the proof in the pudding, if you will. They now know that you're somebody to deliver, even though that's how Ponzi schemes start too, right?
Yeah. So, and that's where there are certainly like there's evil twins of this kind of work. So like in the most egregious form, which I don't think would work to begin with, is you go from selling your $500,000 thing to creating like a $50 online course or certification or assessment or something like that.
Right.
First of all, the distortion between $500,000 and $50, that's like saying, can I borrow your pen? Can I marry your wife?
Right.
It's like the jump is,
exactly.
The jump is so great. It's too much. So that's why
you got to watch the kids first. Then you've got to
babysit. All those things.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why, like in my work, I talk about a reverse flywheel. So I talk about moving from your signature offer and moving counterclockwise down from a big thing to a smaller, what I call a scope. Like, so I have sort of like two sets of wedged offers, scoped and productized. So I always help my clients figure out first their scoped offers, take work that you do, chunk it down, make it smaller, lighter, faster, less than a week, less than $5,000, things that are just like so easy to say yes to without any sort of friction, or as little friction as possible, that it's the Benjamin Franklin effect. It starts it in motion. Then build your reps, do that a whole bunch of times, get cash flow coming in, make things more predictable. And as you're doing that, you're going to answer the same questions over again. You're going to be finishing your client sentences. You're going to create videos so that they can show up to the meeting with their sleeves rolled up. You're going to give a template because they couldn't figure out how to do an assignment you sent them. All that stuff are just assets that you're collecting one at a time. You package that eventually into now more of a digital version. And so what's happening is, like, you can make the digital version because it doesn't include access to you. You make it much more affordable and a lower entry point. And so now, like, you might be selling to an executive and their second and third in command are finding your lower ticket offers. It's helping them do their job better. They love what you're doing. And then what do? They go back to their boss and their boss's boss and say, I use this thing, help me with this like project. I know we have this other thing coming in. We've got to bring these guys in.
You know, it's a great point too, because I'll say again, back to some of the decision making that we saw on our end is sometimes, you know, that out of the gate, big price, it's like, haha, no. But you could always start off with like, okay, well, how about this? And how about we just start off with this initial sort of effort, and then we get it to go from here, which sometimes was also used, a trick we used ourselves in corporate America, because we knew that, okay, if we could get to this spot, then you're more likely to then be able to continue on to the next one, because now at this point, you know, the success you got getting to this stage. So what you've built actually helps the individuals in a corporate environment trying to get something done that otherwise they might actually just hit their own roadblocks, and like being able to navigate that is helpful. And then sometimes just having that alternate option, totally get, you can't do this, but did you want to start with this? That gives you guys everything you need. And then afterwards, if you decide to move on with this, you know, project with somebody else, nothing's gone to waste. You could still leverage, like, that sort of thing can really help build the trust as well. At least it did for us.
Yeah.
Jay, do you have a different approach to when it comes like an executive at a, you know, Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 that has a budget, but it's not really his money? He's actually asked to spend the money, versus a business owner that's his money now. Is there a different approach based on, you know, how you approach your entire process?
That's not where I thought you were going to go with the question, but it's an interesting one. I haven't thought about it. I don't know that it would change. I think, okay, when we used to work with startups, it was all, they were taking money out of their own checking account to pay for our stuff. And so they were definitely, there was more risk for them. They took their time making that decision, and so they kicked the tires a lot more. I think it's just that you trade type of risk. I'm not sure the approach would change, because instead of it being loss of money, now you have loss of reputation. And it's hard to decide like what one is worse in the corporate world. Like, I brought these guys in and they totally blew it. I look like shit, versus I brought these guys in, I spent $1,000 or $10,000 and it didn't work out. Sometimes it's easier to just like part ways with lost money than like damaged reputation. So, but like in the end, it's solving the same problem, which is demonstrating that you're the right person to work with and de-risking their investment in working with you. So I always say it's like Wedge Offers is a way for you to take your expertise and put it in your client's hands. In that sense, they're paying you to kick the tires, which is like flipping the model on its head. Because like most of the stuff that you're going to do is there's a way to charge for it. Even if you make it free, there's a way to do it. Like I always talk about, free with friction. So what you're not doing is you're just showing up and pitching into the void. You're you're not doing free work, which corporate will, like corporate used to ask us to do free work to prove that we were the right group. And then that was like very custom, very much throwaway if it didn't work out. So like at the end of the day, I think you solve those two different characters with the same approach. It's just sort of like there's different things at risk for them.
So then a couple other questions for you. So a big piece of what it sounds like doing here, aside from the ability to establish trust sooner, is it helped when you're especially selling to these companies with a long approval cycle and bureaucracy by, in essence, reducing that initial investment, which then means you don't need to go through as many approvals oftentimes, or the risk feels lesser than, and people are less worried about that, especially when you think about some of these big companies where it's like, yeah, if it's a 10 grand spend versus $100,000 spend, it's like, okay, it's I don't want to call it a rounding error, but it is in some of these large companies based on their budgets. Can you share an example of maybe what a client has done where they had an offering where they then turned into this specific wedge service, just so we could get a little bit more crystal clear on it?
Yeah. Like a lot of my clients are consultants. And so they have like a 6-figure or 7-figure thing. Mm-hmm. And I will help them. Not everyone loves to be a trainer, and it's a different skill set to know how to teach a thing versus just do a thing.
Yeah.
But I found that like training, there's a different mode to it, because a lot of the time now, instead of having one deliverable for one team, in a sense, you can fill the room with 30 people. And so you're amortizing the risk, and you're sort of like, you're investing in 30 people in the company versus sort of like one department or like one outcome. And also training in that sense can come out of different budgets. So like multiple stakeholders can take their P&L budget and fund it. So you're kind of like spreading it around. And training in general there's an upskill to it. So there's like HR and sort of those functions see it as an investment in the people and retaining good talent. So training seems to be like a wedge to consulting in itself. And you can also, the cool thing about training, consulting is hard to customize unless you have like modularity to it. And then you can pull, like, instead of the kit and caboodle, we'll just do this part of it. That happens sometimes, but training is cool because you can custom build it for them.
Yeah.
Like instead of 50 people, we'll train 5. Instead of our 1-week training, we'll do like a half-day virtual session. And so like you can play with the numbers, and like that $10,000 that threshold definitely like flies below the radar. A lot of people have discretionary budget to put that on a credit card. So like knowing those things in advance, training can make some inroads that consulting sometimes bumps up against.
I think that's great. Everything you just mentioned, again, yes, checks out on, our end, because that was the case. It's like you look at it. In fact, I don't know if you see an increase or recommend to your clients to push, sounds like the wrong way, but push more of this at the as you get towards the tail end of the year, because at that point it's kind of a use it or lose it oftentimes for some companies with their training budget. So in that case too, there's even more of that appetite. So it's a great, way in. And I think the other thing too, to your point here around, while your training is such a great one, and it's the same with a lot of I see this in other services. I had one I went through where they're like, hey, we'll train you and teach you on Facebook ads over 3 days. Well, you go to this 3 days, an hour of training each day to get it. But in the process of it, slowly but surely, you're seeing that either these experts really know what they're doing. If we're really going to get into this deeply, we should just lean on them because they're showing us their expertise. Or B, sometimes what ends up happening is part of that sale, they might actually be saying, hey, we made it easy for you, leverage our software. Or if you want to go further with this, we have this package for you, whatever the other training is. So I absolutely see how that could work. Honestly, I'm surprised we didn't see a little bit more of it in, at least I didn't experience as much of that, Art. And I don't know if you'd say you did through your corporate life. I know you see it now on the other side of things as a consultant, but I actually don't think businesses were as savvy sometimes about how they approach that, which is why I think this is really valuable. Instead, I think we had to get savvy on the inside to sometimes propose back of how we can get it into our own, budget constraints.
Well, I mean, it could have been that, and I don't know, Michael, if you remember, we would get so many cold emails with pitches.
Yeah.
I mostly ignored them because they were just nonstop. So maybe they did try, but it was
never got
bad
there.
cold emails that we just never pay attention to. I don't know.
Well, so I want to ask that one too, then, because I'm curious how you guys end up approaching the beginning of that funnel, if you will, Jay, because that's true. It's like if things got through to us in our corporate roles, it usually came through, either an introduction or somebody we met at an event, maybe, or somebody basically taking the approach of, hey, just love to take you to lunch, pick fancy place, whatever. Like somehow an interesting way to get in the door. How do you recommend clients are approaching that?
Well, that's so again, not that every solution I come up with is training, but I'm going to piggyback on what you said, Michael. It's if you're doing it the right way and you're not just letting any old person come with a ticket that wants to learn from you, and you're actually have a little bit of a filtering process so that basically what you're doing is you have a room full of prospects that are primed to buy from you by the end, because they're like, this guy clearly knows his shit. And this is, by the way, this is a huge pitfall where in training or in the lighter version of the work that you do, you hold back. Or I just posted about this today on LinkedIn. You teach the what, but not the how. And I think that's such a huge missed opportunity, because the more expertise that you demonstrate in the room with 30 people sitting there actively watching you, the more that they are likely to be like, I could do this. I learned from Jay, but I don't trust myself. I think we totally overestimate people's reliance and trust in themselves to take something that they learned in a day or a week and apply it to something that is tied to their livelihood, their salary, their reputation at work. Most likely, if you do a great job and knock it out of the park, at least a couple people in the room are going to hire you to do the thing that you do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think to that point, it is still that interesting way that somebody's going to foster that relationship. Because again, we at different points in our career ended up leaning into I call it the smaller guy, not the big guys, in the industries, because the smaller guys were coming at it with a more interesting way to tackle it. Whereas the bigger guys were more about revenue protection, and they were often doing things the other way. Like we leaned into automation at different points in our career that our current vendors, saying when we were in DVD, Blu-ray side of the world, preferred not to do that because that was our cash cow. But it's this interesting partner that comes in with more of a software aim to automate this stuff where, there was that push. But once more, again, just like what you said, as we look back at it now, it was using a little bit of that wedge offer. I just don't think at the time either really knew what it was. In fact, getting into some of those, we at that time even lessened the risk a little bit more, because we're like, how about this? We'll trade you the work on this in exchange for building out this thing, which then could lead to more work. But it's a similar concept about how you slowly but surely build up to that. So again, I love how you've shaped it in this really kind of crystal clear way for people to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to go back to your previous question, it's really, you won't develop at New Haircut, it took me several years to build like what I called an ecosystem of offers. But really what I had is, as my buyer went through different parts of discovering me and becoming more trusting and aware of the work that I did, and then even like their second and third in command were coming in from a totally different angle, from like the lower end of the tier of the offers that I had. I had a spot in that journey for multiple sets of buyers with different authority, different budget, and different interest and needs. Some wanted to just learn. Some had like a massive project that they wanted help for. But eventually I had an offer for each of them along that path.
So what's interesting there, again, I just think about your old hat, where you started off in the engineer side of it, because ultimately you are engineering sales in this scenario, but like in the way that you thought about it, it's like, all right, what's the right solution for each of these in a still systematic, I don't want to call it mechanical way, but there is this interesting way that you looked at it that probably actually gave you a huge advantage versus, the tried and true that people might have stuck with of the past.
No, I appreciate that you noticed that, because I've been noticing it about myself, that I solve sales by using what I know well, which is to have an offer. And an offer is just a product. It's just a way to package what you do inside of something that people can look at and evaluate. Other people use pitch decks and networking events. There's so many different ways to sell. I use product as my way in the door.
Yeah.
I'm more, and maybe that's more personality. Maybe I like to demonstrate value in advance. And I don't say that like, in passing, like I'm a better salesperson because I start with value. I think tried and true salespeople, they know how to ask better questions, and they can maybe lower the stakes and lower the bars by taking you out to wine and dine you. I think anything works as long as you have confidence that you can help solve a problem for your customers. I just use products and sort of like packaged offers to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm curious in here, because I know you talked about the wedge, and then you may have ended up walking through, but you have your profit ladder too. Are these basically what we did just kind of talk about as we went from the wedge, or is profit ladder something different?
Profit ladder is just the name of the company, but it kind of makes sense that what I do is typically like you're trying to get people to the top of your ladder, which is where your signature offer is. That's the stuff, the work that you want to be doing more of. And unfortunately, you're spending more of your time selling it and marketing it than you are doing it. Yep. So the rungs on the ladder are your offers that you build up over time that eventually you've got a spot for people along that journey so that they can work their way up. Some will just see a post of yours. It'll resonate so deeply and they'll go right to your signature offer. That's a nice thing. But a lot of other people want to make sure that you're the right bet. If you think about it, I don't know why it's taken the service industry this long to figure it out, because the SaaS industry has been doing it for decades. It's the freemium to free trial, and the premium, like it's the same thing. I'm just applying a service-based approach to it.
It is interesting because you think about it. In home services, just that example, like this, there's a little bit of using, some companies will be like, hey, get our free initial consult or whatever, or we'll waive that fee. Like, when you do it, like there's attempts, I think, with some of the industries to use it, but it depends on, the industry and where they're at. But I do have to say that the profit ladder, and the reason I asked that is I wasn't sure if it's just the company or if it was the name of the solution too, because visually the way that you painted it, it is, it feels like the solution too. So I guess that's a great name then in that concept.
Yeah, cool. Good. I paid a lot of money for that. No, I
I
figured it out on my own. I did pay to have a new haircut named, but this one I figured out on my own, thanks to a little bit of AI brainstorming.
Nice.
Well, actually, on that AI, because it is obviously over the last year, it's been amazing, to see how much it's advanced. And I'm curious for you now, like, where do you see it? How are you using it today? And where do you see it in the future of sales, really?
Yeah. It's a daily part of my routine. So when I'm going through and thinking through, like when I'm helping a coach or a consultant work through business ideas and I see their signature offer, I'm constantly using it. I'm like, tell me everything you know about this industry. I take transcripts from recordings I have in those one-on-one brainstorms with my clients. I tell me to like, help me understand what they do, help me identify offers for them. How can I get in the door? Here's where they're getting objections. So like I do have, because of my consulting background, I have this sort of like learned superpower to be able to diagnose different industries and how to get in front of people across like different roles and different industries. But like AI has been such a great thought partner for me. So I use it in client engagements. I use it in all of my content brainstorming, my newsletters, my LinkedIn posts. And it's always like, I've got this idea based on everything you know about me, my client, my work, which now my ChatGPT version has like libraries full of information about me and my work. Based on what you know about me and my client, here's this idea. Here's this kernel of an idea I had. Pull it apart. Like I want to convey these 3 points. Like what should I touch upon? And like half the time I'll overdo it and then I'll say, cool, this is what I came up with. Can you make it simpler? And they'll strip away all of my beloved catchphrases and sarcastic, witty memes and whatnot, and just makes it clearer to understand.
When you're doing that, are you literally just ChatGPT with its memory? Are you using project specific? Are you training GPTs?
No, I I haven't gone to that. I'm just using ChatGPT. I haven't
okay.
used any like custom stuff. I've got people that do AI and automation are very good partners of mine because we have a shared audience. Because once somebody has an offer, then they need to like get it out into the world and they need to automate systems behind it. So I've got people that do a lot of the work and I've been learning from them, but I've just been using table stakes, ChatGPT, and it works well. It is a pain in the ass to scroll through and find a newsletter issue that I wrote 6 months
Yeah.
ago and figure out the thread in there that I want to turn into today's post.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. No, and that's why I'm curious on it too, but also with your background in engineering side, it's like you do have the capabilities to get really creative with how you stitch some of these together. But yeah, because sometimes I'll run into it, especially because I have a couple of different businesses and or I have a partner in around a business and we both have these short-term rentals. And at times I'll be like, okay, I'll go to ask something and it comes back. I'm like, no, that's not mine. You just pulled in information from this other person's, property. So I like when you have a lot of clients, sometimes that's this one thing that I've seen with it. And I've been trying to think about how to organize it to not, but I think that's where, again, it's a great brainstorming partner. You still have to ultimately streamline or pull out the right information that you want. What other tools are you using other than GPT?
So my background is with New Haircut. My background, I used design thinking was sort of like the way that I thought about product strategy, which is really just like comes from the designer's toolkit. It's just a way to immerse yourself and build empathy for the customers that you're creating solutions to. So everything that I take from design thinking flows into my work today at Profit Ladder, along with all the tools that I used to use. So I use Miro because all of my interactions with my clients are very structured, visualized conversations. Because for me, if I get on a call and just go back and forth and shoot the shit, and even if it's like I'm being asked good questions, to action on that is very hard. Like if you told me like write a thesis based on today's interview, I'd be like, what the hell did we even talk about? Like, I'd spin. So I'm a systems guy. So I've systematized that, put it into Miro. When I run my master classes, it's all in Miro. What other tools do I use? Beehive for my newsletter.
Okay.
I begrudgingly use LinkedIn multiple times a week. Actually, I just discovered Condo, which takes the LinkedIn inbox, and it's a third-party software. You can download the desktop version. The guy Mitchell that's building it is a genius. He's very helpful, but it basically it's everything that you want an inbox to be. It's as if LinkedIn actually cared and built an inbox like Google and Yahoo and everybody did with their email inboxes, reminders, labeling, nudging. You can assign things to other people. It's totally genius.
I checked it out because we had a previous guest who had mentioned it because that's how they do it. They sell a lot in basically DMs, Matt, and he basically is like, he's like, and as soon as he described it, I'm like, that's what's been missing from my life because otherwise it's chaos in LinkedIn trying to do any of it. So that's good. I'm glad to hear another recommendation on it.
I use Notion. So when I sort of one of the endpoints of my work is to give people a launch blueprint. They're mostly standardized at this point because I've done it so many times, but there's a little bit of customization to it depending on what they're building. But I have that all built in Notion so that when we come up with an offer, I send them off and they can literally go work through it on a 12-week cadence and build the offer that we come up with. So that's been great. I've been delaying Notion because it felt a little overwhelming to me, but now I figured out a way to make it work.
Well, we can relate to that. We've tried it too, just around the podcast organization and stuff. And again, there's some stuff, but it's kind of back to that thing again of the gateway. It's like, those as software companies, here's your free version, try that one. But then it's like, as you start getting to, some of the really useful things and you start getting into the paid versions, that would make it even better. Very interesting.
I was going to say about ChatGPT. The other day I launched the app and I went to the audio side of it. And as soon as it started, it said, "Hello, Artin. How's the podcast going?" I'm like, "What?" It already knows so much about me that it's a little scary.
It's scary, but it's also helpful at times because I know when I've drafted things, I'm like, "Oh wow, I wouldn't have thought about including that." But then at the same time, I ran into stuff like recently, also something yesterday, other than pulling in the wrong information. Like at times, I'm like, but we already determined we wanted to include this. Why won't you put this back in there? But then I'm like, okay, just remember one day AI is going to be our masters. So I better be nice to it before they take us over and put us in pods.
I honestly, I would say the biggest benefit that AI gives to me is I think we in general just overcomplicate everything,
Yes.
especially business owners. Here's this thing, I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks and it spits out 3 sentences and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it
No,
is.
I'm completely with you. I love that. And actually, if you take it a step further with what you said too, and I know they have their tasks now for people to do. And granted, I haven't been as consistent with this yet, but I thought it was interesting. I asked it, hey, give me a daily workout like routine. Like, and then I want you to, ultimately grade me on how I'm doing against this. Now, it did good on the first part with the routine. It hasn't necessarily sent me grades. Hence, I'm like, forget it then. I'm not being held accountable. But it's really interesting to see where that does go in the future because people over research everything and don't actually take action. And I think if you could get to this point here, and especially as these tools get better and better and understand you, they're going to, I think, be able to really help people get out of their own ways in some ways. We'll see. We'll find other ways as humans, to get in our own ways, maybe.
I mean, sticking with that theme, like if someone is trying to start something and they're kind of feeling stuck, like what advice would you have for that person to get moving? Is it just use ChatGPT or there's a larger kind of piece of advice that comes with that?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I created this this masterclass is because the biggest place that people get stuck is I have this thing, I know it works, it's got product market fit, I've delivered it a couple times, I just don't have enough leads in the pipeline. I just need to I need a little bit more volume, but they don't have that starting point. So I think there's probably a way to just ask yourself the question, what's one thing that I could take from my work, deliver in less than 1 week, and charge less than $5,000 for? I know that it's a sliding scale depending on where you are in the world and how much you sell at your signature versus your entry point, but just use that frame of reference. That's what got me to figure out all of my wedge offers over time. Like the starting place is just take something that there's interest and curiosity that you could kind of like do in your sleep. It's a small part of your work. The challenge that people bump up against is like the work I do is magical. I can't take my year-long process and do anything of value in 1 week, but you can. I promise you can. The work I did was as complex as it got in product innovation, and I was able to find that 1 week process, and it completely opened up doors left and right.
How much of that product innovation experience that I'm pretty sure it's just part of your DNA now actually helped you innovate on these wedge offers that are also product? I feel like that background really helped you, but if somebody doesn't have that background, do you think they can still get to where you got, or would it take longer?
I have a goal to help 100,000 people realize that there's a better way to sell service-based business owners. So if I can make that happen at scale, that's a big goal of mine. In the meantime, while I'm still working with little cohorts of 30 people at a time, I do think my background has helped. I tell people in my newsletter all the time, treat everything like a prototype. Your ideas are much less precious than you think they are. Get in the mode of experimenting as quickly as you can. And then once you've got something that's hitting, then build upon it. Like the shiny object syndrome is like the evil twin of that, where you have 50 different prototypes or 50 different wedge offers, and you're talking about every single one all the time. Yeah. So I think I've built a mindset to know that prototyping and experimentation and iteration is just part of the process. But it's so simple when I explain it to people that if you read a thing about how I think about wedge offers, you should have enough to go and run an experiment for yourself and figure it out.
So I think when you say too, just wedge offers, making sure I'm correct in this delineation, but maybe I'm not, is that generally a wedge offer is something that you are charging for, because some people could say that, hey, get this free download can act like a free, or this free 5-day training. But in that scenario, and when I say 5-day, I'm thinking more like the email fed one, here's the video. But in those scenarios, would you say those free ones, maybe they're the corner of the wedge, but maybe they're not the wedge in the way that you think about it? Or would you still think about those freemium kind of versions as a version of a wedge?
Yeah, it's a good question. A wedge can be anything from $0 up until less than
Okay.
what you charge for your signature.
Yeah.
The job to be done of the wedge offer is that it's easier to buy for your
Okay.
customer. Most of the time it's easier to understand, and therefore the sale is easier. I have my masterclass right now is free. I should be charging for it. I make it free. It's 2 half days. But I have enough friction in the process to know that I get 100% show up rate to my master classes, as opposed to like the webinar, you get like 30%.
Amazing.
I get 100% show up rates. People commit to doing a 15 to 30-minute call with me afterward.
Yeah.
It's all of my ICP. So I have like a screening process in the background. So I'll do that free thing because I know I have a captive audience of of the person that is most inclined to hire me afterward. Free for an individual that's throwaway work is a terrible idea. Free discovery calls, free strategy calls, like book me for an hour for a free strategy. In my experience, they don't work because I have to give you an hour of my time and you're still a stranger. You haven't demonstrated yet that hour will be worth my time. Doesn't matter if it's free. Doesn't matter if it's $100, it's still my time. So pricing is only like one part of the equation. Okay. Most of it is just make it an offer that's Alex Hormozy says this, and he borrowed it from a million other people. An offer that's so good people feel it's stupid saying no to it.
So is that how you're getting the 100% turn? Because that's unheard of, and at least many of the things I think of. How are you ensuring that rate?
A few things. One is, I think it's mine, so take it with a grain of salt. But when I look at that landing page, I have this uneasy feeling that I should be charging $1,000 or so per seat. That's the feeling that I want my clients to feel when we're looking at an offer. Not that everything's free, but make it in a sense that it feels like you're giving 10x the value. I know that masterclass is 10x value, which gives me confidence when I talk to people about it. So then I have all this confidence going into it. When I have a conversation with people about it, they know that they're getting reams of value from me. They know it's going to be actionable. They know that I tell them out of the gate, you can't buy anything during this masterclass. So there's no hook waiting for you at the end of it. Yep. And then afterward, there's a small application process. They get a personal email from me with 5 questions they have to answer. And one of those is about committing to showing up, committing to the call afterward. And if I get yeses across the board, then they're in. And then from there, they get a series of also handwritten emails from me. Here's what's coming. Here's a sneak peek. Here's some homework to do. Here's a special surprise. And I think people are already excited when they sign up on the landing page. And by the time the workshop comes, I have people that are DMing me saying, I can't wait for tomorrow. So it feels like I've figured out a way to just communicate many, many times over that this is super high value.
That's great. But it sounds like a key piece you did there too is that sort of commitment that you look for. That's a little bit different than the traditional, webinar where people are looking at, they're already expecting 50% turnout would be great. Whereas in yours, you're like, no, I'm actually optimizing for the 100% because of where I know this has a chance of going afterwards. And anybody who can commit to those things has a greater chance of being a customer. So that's really smart.
I left a couple things out too. As you said that, I chase people, when they sign up, I go onto LinkedIn, I connect with them. I say, you signed up for the masterclass. Let's connect. I'm going to follow your work. I post, I'm putting a ton of work in.
That's great.
AI needs to help me eventually when I'm running multiple of these per month. I'm going to need ways to automate pieces of this or give it to a VA. But I'm touching that person multiple times to make sure that they're the right, that's going to help them, but also that they're going to be the right person to be in that session.
But now you've turned it into a bit more of a real relationship, not just the stranger where they gave an email in exchange for the thing that they even knew themselves they may or may not go to. Now it's real. And it's their own reputation is now in a way on the line. So that's really, really smart. And I guess, again, for you, and probably for some of your customers, that could work probably from some of your customers, but it probably all, again, depends on the type of product and offer that they have. Is that fair to say? Or do you think everybody could get to that 100% turnout?
That's a good question. I learned by going through other people's virtual trainings and events, and just like I stitched it together over time to see what are the things that I always show up to, because I'm a like leave out of the back door guy as soon as I can.
Yeah.
But there were some that I was showing up to and sticking through. So I just kind of like took all those pieces and combined them together. I think if you're smart enough, and if there's so many different elements to it, like I make sure that people know that, yes, I'm teaching, but you're also going to be in the room with at least 20 other business owners who are all like high character, want the same outcomes. No one is here to sell you some slimy shit in the back door.
Yeah.
So they know that there's so many instances of being tricked or having that buyer's remorse once you come into it, even for a free thing, because 2 days of your time is not free at all. I make sure that they know that in advance. There's no question. And if you go to the page and you don't get that warm and fuzzy feeling, then I never even see them to begin with. The people that go through it, they show up.
That's awesome. Love it.
That rate is pretty incredible.
We'll see if I stick it out in a year from now. We'll see.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, who you help is a lot of consultants and just consulting businesses. So, what would you say is just one hard truth about scaling a consulting business that people might not want to hear?
Your client's not buying because you're not clear in what it is you do. Period.
And I think that's short and sweet as it is. It's so true. I've seen it. I've been guilty of that. But like, I can't tell you how many times I'll look at something and I'll be like, I want to, like, there might be something here, but I can't figure out what it is that you're doing. And somebody shouldn't have to look that hard. I think that goes for any purchase anybody ever makes. So
I was just going to say, to me, that's sounds like a universal advice we should take ourselves.
Right. People make that mistake a lot on just going back to LinkedIn there, because they don't think about sometimes is their page enough as their part of their sales funnel, but let alone, on website. As this a couple of the businesses I have, when I research competitors at times to see, I'm like, because sometimes you see some brilliant offers. You're like, okay, I got to borrow this. But then sometimes you see the other one, you're like, are they doing well? Because people just don't understand what the heck the problem is that they solve for them. So Great point. And I think sometimes people fall in love with their own voice so much that in their sales page and other stuff, they don't get to the point soon enough too. And then I think they lose people then.
You bury the lead. Yep. Yeah. You overcomplicate things. You talk about the process instead of the destination, like all those things, which is why LinkedIn is a great place to test and get feedback on your offers, because I've been one to blame the algorithm a million times over, but the truth is, if people aren't seeing it, it's because it wasn't worth seeing. So
right. Yeah. No, I know that hurts, but it is in the end, it's like the quality side on Instagram. That's one thing all the time too, when people are always like, we'll get you to whatever it is, how I did 20,000 in this one week. I'm like, don't get me wrong. There are ways that people could teach you to make better content around it. But when people start trying to figure out the different ways to beat it, I have a property on Airbnb, the same thing. They're like, it's like most people suffer there because they're marketing their property, for example, to everybody, when it's like, where do you hone in? Who is your customer? How do you want to speak to them? Because the more you speak to them, the more Airbnb is going to serve you to them, because they love what you're doing for them and how you're not just the marketing in terms of text, but also the pictures and everything else like that. But so many people instead just put these things out there hoping that people discover, and don't actually hone in enough on who their customer is and what they want. So,
I wish that it worked so well that you put one piece of brilliant content out into the world, right? Or a landing page and your doors were knocked down.
Unfortunately, that's not how it works.
We did do a recording yesterday with Laura Acosta, who's big on LinkedIn as well as that. And she, one of the things she did mention is when she had first posted early on LinkedIn, actually one of her first posts went viral. And, it's like, I'm like, oh man, like, for that to happen, first off, it could set somebody up, because after that, they're like, oh, but actually, because she had that win, it actually helped her. She continued her momentum, knowing that, it was capable of it. So in that case, it was a great boost. And maybe that's what LinkedIn needs to do for everybody, just to get them to all not feel, down and out when they suddenly hit it. But I think the reality is so many people have to find their voice before they really start even hitting that. And that is partially internally, but I think, again, once more, it's partially to really understand that customer, because there's a different points of views out there. And I'm actually curious to your perspective on this. Some people say, right, focus it as if, what would you want if this was you, if you're solving your own problem? And others would say, no, talk to enough customers to really figure that out. I'm a fan of the second, but where do you sit with this?
I actually think it's an and, not an or in that sense. So like I am a fan of scratch your own itch businesses. And I know that because in New Haircut, I had all these tools and frameworks that I never used myself in my own business. Yeah. I knew that bigger companies needed them because their bets were so much bigger. Mm-hmm. So they needed to do the discovery and the innovation and all those steps. Today, I'm literally solving the problem for myself. And when I launched, I created a solution to what I'm doing today that was do it yourself. It was an online, it was like a teachable course, and people went through it and they're like, I get it, but I get stuck. And I didn't talk to anybody. I just said, like, I put my engineer hat on and I said, how would I like to learn? So I had the problem and I knew a lot about the problem, but I jumped to solution too quickly. Then I backed up, I did a lot of research, and I realized that people needed to do it with me for now until I know enough that I can systematize and productize pieces of it. But I jumped to the sort of like engineered solution too soon. But
interesting.
So like, because I had the experience, I was able to navigate the problem much more quickly, but my sort of knee-jerk reaction and the solution I took was the wrong one. So I needed to do that research.
That's interesting. So in that scenario, you built like a course to sell? Is that what you?
Okay, I made the mistake. So like on one end of the spectrum, people don't have any offers. And then on the other end, they make a barrage of like shitty lead magnets and tripwires that are like super productized. And there's none of their brand and personality and story. And they don't yet have the reps and the expertise. Yeah. It's just sort of this packaged experience. So I made that mistake. I jumped right to the productized version and I had to back up.
Interesting. Very interesting. I'm about to, I call it the experiment I have now. So I had a product I built a year ago based on coaching I do for clients and basically helping them land more promotions, get paid more in their jobs. And I built out this program with the idea of pairing both the coaching and the program itself for people to go through. But because other business I'm involved in has taken more of my time, I just haven't done much with it. So it's just been sitting there. So I finally decided, okay, I'm going to put this out there on the shelf, but I'm charging $99 for it because I'm like, it isn't one that has the customized things, but I'm really curious to see what feedback ends up coming of that, of whether or not, again, at $99, I think it's one of those that, going back to the 10X, I think this is even further than, 10X, I think, value of what people could get. I actually see it as it might be more of the wedge of what you described and me eventually turning this later into something where now I'm like, hey, great, you did that for those who are wanting, some more help. But I'll also be curious of whether or not it comes back into a little bit about what you described. But I do think, both heeding your warning and I think the approach I take to it in general is it's still me infused in it, and that's how I'm going to be putting it out there as well as my own experience. And this is how I was able to do so. So I'm saying that out loud in case, you're seeing any warning signs here where you're like, well, just make sure you do this or that. But
yeah, so I would tell you, I would coach you to do it in person first, like 50 times. And maybe part of your work you have. And then once you get that right for individuals, then you can turn it into a group fashion, which allows you to have much more better leverage of your time by still getting paid. Yeah, and then you have the reps and the assets and the materials to start to do like the completely do it yourself.
Yeah. It started as a one-on-one. Then I've, some people have had now access to it as a way to get the feedback and do that. Mm-hmm. The challenge for me of even doing the coaching with it now, even if it's group coaching that I haven't done, is I'm like, again, I've literally parked this thing for a year because of this other business. So that's why I'm like, well, might as well at least get it out there at this low enough cost. But I do hear what you're saying, because when we started this call and you mentioned about how you just went through your offer and then you changed, your offer, which I've changed this, thing. This is actually the second launch. The first time I ever launched it was a slightly different program. And now this is a change based on that. But it'll be very interesting to see how the market ends up reacting.
So like one idea for you, before I made the connection of what my current offer is, I used my digital version as a place to test. So I used it as my prototype. And I think you said that as well. I did like beta testing. I promised people free access to like what was coming down the road. Nice. And I got so much great feedback because my offer forced a like very, instead of just talking at the surface of like, what growth challenges do you have? I had something that they could actually interact with, and we could go through my systems together, and I could see where they got stuck, where it broke. And it was just, I got so much more detailed feedback from them.
Good to know. Okay. I think that's the path I'm going to find myself down a little bit here as well. So awesome.
While we're talking about advice, if you can go back in time and talk to young Jay, what advice would you give him?
First, I have entrepreneurial blood going back like 4 or 5 generations. So it's hard for me to say that I would have talked myself out of staying in corporate longer. But before I made that jump, I certainly would have spent a year or 2 at Accenture and at the other tech companies I worked at in Manhattan, building relationships, taking off the headphones and actually building relationships. Because, you know, a lot of people, what you'll hear them say in their first years is that their network supported them and they got lots of referrals and word of mouth. I had none of that. I would probably go back and tell myself, like, if you're going to make this leap, let's do a little bit of planning. I'm like, this sounds like a good idea. Let's just get into it, which sometimes that works as an entrepreneur. Other times it completely blows up. And then I would have, as I built my company, I would have picked my head up to realize that just because all the sales books tell you that this is how you grow a business and, you know, wine and dine and networking events and fanatical prospecting doesn't mean that's the only way to do it.
Great advice. Yeah. I've been guilty of that the same thing. You know, I think a lot of us are sometimes in a relationship with that. And I look back at the people now who I'm like, man, the ones who are natural networkers, sometimes I get jealous of, because I'm like, you know, my introversion in some ways stayed away. But I think it was because of the perception of it and these sort of invisible beliefs of sort of thinking at the time, like that. I'm trying to think of how to put it, but sometimes it just felt like it was easier to avoid what might have come of that, because I could see, oh yeah, but what if there's this? Either it could be what if they are not interested, or it could just be, what if I come across as trying to push something? Like, it's so easy to talk yourself out of it, instead of saying the things like, well, what if it turns out to be a great friendship? What if it turns into something bigger? What if I can help them? Like, that's how, you know, a healthier way to look at this, versus approaching everything with the pain instead of the potential pleasure outcome of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Jay, your insights and advice have been amazing. I have more questions for you that I'll probably email you on the side. But if others have questions for you, where can they find you?
Profitladder.net. That's right now. It's a newsletter that has about 60 issues of my ideas and frameworks and systems. And what you'll also find in there is there's a masterclass that I run once a month. I teach my system. I give my whole playbook away, and you leave with ideas for actual offers. And like I said, you can't buy anything. So it's all give, all value.
It's great. Love it. And then, so when's the next one of those?
Right now we're recording on February 13th. The next one is next week. It's full. March is already half full. April has people that are coming into it as well. So awesome. I'm going to do it once a month. So February 19th and 20th is the one March 19th and 20th is the one that's available.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, then there we go. People got to get on it.
Yeah. Well, again, if anybody, has questions, just watching this, drop them in the comments. Let us know what you think. And then we'll see everybody on the next episode.
Thanks, guys. Thanks again.
If you like this episode and want to learn more about sales, watch the episode with Richard Moore, a sales guru.